Kristen Nyampeta once shared a story that Rwandans used song as gravestones before there was a need for memorialization sites that came after the genocide. He wondered the impact of this on the collective body. South Africans used the ancestral lines as a way of introduction, a sort of generational biography, sonically nodding to what is out of sight but embodied. The body becomes a hard drive. A stain or a mark has been left. What is out of sight persists in different forms, gathering momentum to resurface. Santhosh S will present next. Please feel free to add your comments and questions during his presentation.
Six memos to the present. The title of this task referenced Italo Calvino's 1987 book, 6 Memos for the Next Millennium. There are a couple of reasons for emulating Calvino's influential text in the Speech Act. Calvino's text deals with the very question of writing, not merely in terms of the craft of writing, but more in terms of unearthing the intensive field of language itself. The 6 memos I intend to present are also, in a sense, about writing. It's about new speakabilities. It is about new discursive and linguistic black holes. And it's also about the stuttering effect of language acts. Calvino also looks at histories of fictional writing, both in the local linguistic context of Italian literature itself, as well as what are considered as world classics. He does this in order to unconceal the often inexplicable and imperceptible dimensions of language. The title of his memos themselves, such as lightness, quickness, exactitude, and so on, are clear indicators of this aspect. Similarly, all the memos that I propose are largely drawn from various philosophical currents where I often find genealogies of my own writing. They are neither categories nor descriptions. In fact, they are conceptual apparatuses through which I attempt to sidestep the very logic of categorization. I use heterogeneous set of conceptual apparatuses. They need not have any disciplinary homogeneity. The theoretical architects of these concepts are always not aligned with commensurate schools of thought or ideologies, or in fact, any political persuasions. Before I start the memos, I just want to say that Kabelo, Michelle, and or Lantian may come in between, especially after the first memos, third memos, and fifth memos, and reflect on their own thoughts about it. So these are going to be more like responses, but not necessarily in terms of responding to my writing alone, but it's going to be a it's also part of their larger questions about discursivity, discursive justice, and forms of justice, and so on. The first memo, memo number 1, becoming /historical. I draw the word historical from Walter Benjamin's essay, Thesis on the Concept of History, where Benjamin defends history against dominant historicism by evoking the concept of the historical. This is why the title of the Benjamin's essay itself carries three crucial words: thesis, concept, and history. As anybody familiar with the text will know, each thesis is presented as a series of aphorisms, but they bleed into each other. The power of his work lies in the way that each thesis is a cryptic/mystic text that can be developed into a full-blown philosophical treatise. Benjamin writes in his sixth thesis, I quote, "Articulating the past historically does not mean recognizing it the way it really was. It means appropriating a memory as it flashes up in a moment of danger. Historical materialism wishes to hold fast that image of the past which unexpectedly appears the historical subject in a moment of danger." Close quote. This is a sense in which the historical is so important for my own ruminations. There is a particular reason for this signposting. Across the globe, subaltern intellectual contributions seldom enter the discursive field as conceptual interrogations. Often, what we witness is a form of additive history where the general intelligentsia accept the subaltern intelligentsia as contributing to the historical process in terms of reformative gestures and actions. In other words, subaltern intellectual contributions are rarely seen as interrupting historical processes or being a conceptual interrogation into the knowledge itself. Rather, they are projected as something reformative in character, in action, in process, and so on. In that sense, subaltern intellectual history is reduced to certain forms of instrumentality, thereby denying them philosophical intensity, universal relevance, becoming in the process mere acts of pragmatism. In this section, I would like to interrogate this mode of writing history by briefly engaging with a few historical figures, events, and enunciations. The first two instances are from the life of mystic, poet, philosopher, saint Sri Narayana Guru, born in Kerala, the tiny southernmost state of the Union of India. In the first instance, I'm going to just to tell you the instance. In 1888, Narayana Guru, popularly known as Guru, in a small town near Trivandrum, consecrated an idol. It's not a big deal to consecrate an idol in our contemporary sense. But at that point in time, consecration of the idol is a sole right of the Brahmin class. So what he has done is that he has gone to this riverside and he just swam into the river. He just took a rock and he took the rock and put it into a surface and declared it as a consecration of an idol. So naturally, the Brahmin priest class opposed Narayana Guru's this gesture, this act, saying that you have no right to consecrate an idol. So Guru, in a very humorous sense, said that please don't worry. This it's not a Brahmin idol of Shiva, but it's an Irava Shiva. So Irava is the former untouchable caste Guru belong to. So he said, don't worry, it's not a Brahmin Shiva, it's a Irava Shiva. So this is very, very important because we often won't pay attention to these gestures, these acts, these utterances made in history. And we take them as like, as if this kind of utterances happens, in everyday life and so on. But there is an eventual quality to these utterances. But the story is not ended there. After this consecration and so on, and he, along with the community members, made a temple there. And the temple, he had inscribed something in Malayalam. It's very, very important because the Malayalam is the language spoken in the in everyday community language that is now become a kind of how classical status and so on. But Malayalam is largely the language of the people. So he writes in Malayalam that I'm going to kind of say that thing in Malayalam itself, saying that Jadi Bhedam Madadvesham Edumillada Sarvarum Sodaratvena Vazhunna Madrugastanamanida. In a rough translation of that writing is this. This is the model abode where everyone will live in brotherhood without animosity due to difference of caste and religion. This is the rough translation of the verses that Guru has written on the temple after the consecration and after they built the temple. To my mind, this move from particularism by saying that this is an Irava Shiva, this is a Shiva of my caste, to universalism, where saying that it endorses the ultimate universal fraternity. It endorses a place where people can, come and congregate together, irrespective of their religion and caste, is a claim. It's a claim where that the subaltern intellectual traditions challenges, the humanism of Brahminism itself by claiming that they have a better humanism that can, incorporate, they can more inclusive, unlike the Brahminic treatise that exclude people and so on. This is the first instance. The second instance also comes from a guru, but it comes from a very late part of his religious, spiritual, philosophical endeavor in 1927, roughly 40 years after his consecration in Arivapuram, the Shiva idol consecration. And this is also very, very, very important because this happens in a very small town in middle Kerala, what is known now as Alapi, where a group of people invited Guru to consecrate an idol of Ardhanarishwara, the Shiva Parvati together idol, and he agreed to do that. So he came to enact that, but then realized that in this last 40 years, the Guru himself actually was professing that we already have made enough number of temples. What we now need is more educational institutions. What we now need is to go beyond this kind of idol worship and so on. So once Guru reached the spot where he is supposed to perform the act of consecration, that the youth of that area have challenged the orthodoxy, saying that why do we need to do this consecration? Instead, either we should build schools, or at least we should not entertain, idolatry. So Guru heard the arguments of both the sides. Meanwhile, one of the people who had invited Guru publicly declared that if Guru is not going to perform this act of installing the idol of Arthanarishwara, he is going to do a self-immolation there itself. So Guru was not perplexed. He was listening to them and he said that, okay, he asked one of the people whom he knew by name, asking them, is it possible to get a mirror? So he said, yes, we can procure it. So he asked him to go and get a mirror as big as possible. If the mirror can actually show you in full size, it is great. So, but we are talking about 1927. The transport things are actually very slow and so on, because since Guru asked to get a big mirror, a long mirror, a elongated mirror, and so on. So they had to go to the nearby town, that is Kochi, now called Ernakulam. So they had gone there and got this mirror. So once the mirror is actually there, and actually Guru said that, okay, just put it inside the sanctum sanctorium. I will consecrate it. So instead of actually doing anything to it, actually he said that why don't you, some of you, he just pointed out to somebody who is standing outside, why don't you come and write Om Shanti on the mirror. So the person, because it's kind of asked unexpectedly, he kind of surprised, but since Guru had asked that he has to do that to perform the task, he had gone inside the sanctorium and he wrote Om Shanti. But in that tension, or maybe he may not be like very good with the language, he actually made a spelling mistake in the word Om Shanti. So people who are literate among the community got very furious, and they were expecting that Guru will be, either removing it or going to add the mistaken or rectifying the mistaken word. So Guru said that no, there is no point of correcting the mistakes. The mistakes has meaning. Okay, this is something that it's very important, because there is something that a religious figure, a guru, a spiritual guru, asking someone randomly, is it possible to get a mirror? And they have to go to a shop. It's not even very nearby town. They have to almost travel half the day to get a mirror. Then he put it, and then he refused to write. Writing is also a way of actually kind of consecrating that into an idol. He asked somebody else to write, and the writing itself, interestingly, it's a mistake. So he refused to rectify it by stating that the mistake in language, mistake itself has meaning. The reason I evoke these two instances of what I call performative politics. It's also merely not performative politics. It's also performative politics from history. Is that the parallel can actually be drawn from many instances from the history of modern art, history of modern avant-garde. If we kind of just think about something like the Duchampian acts of actually putting a commode, a industrially made commode, into a gallery space and venerating it as an artwork. That act of Duchamp, and as all of us agree, all of us, some may disagree, but all of us actually feel that it does have an everlasting impact on the way in which we understand, experience theorize, articulate, narrativize art in our contemporary times. Because that become a quintessential ingredient in terms of talking about what constitute anti-aesthetics to what constitute avant-garde and so on. But we hardly look at the gesture of Guru. It's also like very interesting because it does have all the ingredients that the Dushanbe act had. Buying from a shop, somebody buying it, somebody signing it, putting it into what is considered as a kind of a pristine place of viewing art. It's a kind of a modern secular temple. Now, this my argument is that such performative gestures can also found in many mystic poet philosophers. Even if you look at somebody like Akamahadevi, Kabir, and so on, you can see there is this or even Phule. If you look at this performative politics is so central to their form of enacting social change, their form of initiating social change. I just want to kind of put a caveat here. I'm not trying to create a kind of a facile relativism here, because I know that there are these events that I am describing are very distinct in terms of historical acts. But my argument is that this kind of a comparative politics also, or because this comparative politics that we are doing is not with a comparable thing. There's no question. The comparative politics with incomparable moments or events, to my mind, can produce unforeseen possibilities of intersection between aesthetics and politics. This is the first thing. In that sense, I am saying that we need to, just as a historian, I just want to say that if you want to look at where we can kind of find the beginning of performance art, we need to really kind of revitalize our own historical understanding to see the genealogies of the present moment. The second instance, not second instance, because I already have narrated two instances, but the second moment in history, I want to narrate it from the life of B.R. Ambedkar from 1891 to 1956. And just for some of you may not be knowing who is Ambedkar. He's one of the most influential political philosophers or activists or jurist, whichever way you want to narrativize, describe, categorize him, that India ever produced, at least in the modern period. And it is often kind of acknowledged, at least in the last 2 decades, his incomparable contribution to the emancipation of the downtrodden caste, class, and so on. He has done it through various modes in terms of writing, in terms of social action, in terms of as a jurist, somebody who is chairman of drafting Indian Constitution, and so on. So, in that sense, Ambedkar is the most contemporary or most alive politician today. Maybe very few can really match him in terms of his contemporaneity, even though he passed away almost 70-80 years back. The event of his life, but that I am going to describe here, is a is called the Magadh Satyagraha in 1927. It's almost, interestingly, they are like very close to each other. The Kannadi Pradishta and Magadh Satyagraha. The first one I was talking about, the mirror consecration, and the Magadh Satyagraha comes almost the same year. So it's a very not very complicated story. Ambedkar led thousands of people to what is known as untouchables, or formerly untouchable people, to a water tank or a talab or a it's not a river, but it's more like a tank in a town, to drink water from that talab, that tank. The importance of this act is this is one of the first instances in the history of India, at least in North India, I can say. This is the first instance where the untouchables, the quote-unquote untouchables, are making claim on what is known as the commons. This is no more about some concessions, but it is also a claim on the commons. So it's not like something that merely about some benefits, but it's a claim. But I'm going to read out a small passage from the Ambedkar's speech in that Magadh Satyagraha. It's also known as Magadh's Conference, because Satyagraha is a word that comes from Gandhi, and some of you are familiar with the kind of differences approach Gandhi and Ambedkar had on caste. So he kept on changing this word in his own writing. But he has very clear. It's not like he's kind of interchangeably using the word conference and Satyagraha. He also using it in a very conscious way. But let me read out this passage from Ambedkar's speech in Magadh Conference or Magadh Satyagraha. I quote, "Do not let yourself suppose that Satyagraha committee has invited you to Magadh merely to drink the water of Chowdar Lake of Magadh. It is not as if drinking the water of Chowdar Lake will make us immortal. We are not going to the Chowdar Lake merely to drink the water. We are going to the lake to assert that we too are human beings like others. It must be clear that this meeting has been called to set up the norm for equality. I am certain that no one who thinks of this meeting in this light will doubt that it is unprecedented. I feel that no parallel to it can be found in the history of India. If we seek for another meeting in the past to equal this, we shall have to go to the history of France on the continent of Europe." Close quote. So the story is that after this this enactment, after this protest, after this transgression of the given boundaries, that the Brahmins has to perform a kind of a ritual purification, where they have used 108 pots of cow urine and cow dung. And it's not necessarily only cow dung and cow urine. They also Panchagavya to purify this water so that the upper caste and the Brahmins can actually use this thing. So what I am saying that to indicate that the intensity of that moment, in the sense that even a mere symbolic act of actually going into that the common land, common water resource, and declaring it, it kind of produces such kind of not only animosity but also certain kind of a purification ritual so that it become amenable to the people of the country, about against the people that is emerging. I'm kind of evoke this book by Soumya Chowdhury, a dynamic philosopher who had worked quite extensively on Ambedkar, but not as a sociologist or not as a kind of biographer, but more in terms of as a philosophical encounter with Ambedkar's thought, like Ambedkar as a philosopher. So Soumya Chowdhury writes that it is important for us to understand that why Ambedkar is evoking the French history to signpost the Mahat Satyagraha. I'm just going to quote again. We call him Shomo. He says that what the Satyagraha has done is to breach the continuum of history. There is a rupture that was produced into the very history itself. And he writes, I'm going to cite now, in quote, the breach in Hindu history, hollowed out by Mahad transgression, is only vicarious functionary of the revolutionary immortality of the modern idea of politics already inaugurated somewhere else. So what I'm trying to say is that, the evocation of what happened to the history of Europe after French Revolution, is a history that has kind of narrated again and again, from multiple perspectives, multiple vantage points, and so on, and it has produced, some kind of a universal validation to it. Even today we use the word the commune, community, communism, and so on. It all stems from that historical moment in a precise sense, wherein which both the organizational and the anarchic spirit of the revolutionary movement fused into something that as an event. And that event is more or less in differing philosophical or political orientation. Everybody agree that it has produced a rupture in the history, wherein which the modern notion of democracy, modern notion of equality, fraternity, and so on actually kind of emerged from that moment. But if you look at the way in which Ambedkar's history has written, Mahat Satyagraha has written, it is just an event in reclaiming something for the lower caste. That rupture it has produced to history, the conceptual intervention that it has made to history, has only revisited in last 20 years because of the amount of Dalit scholarship, the amount of scholarship of the marginal subaltern communities emerged. This is my my point. Because this is very clear that even the way in which both Narayana Guru and Ambedkar, because since these are the only two figures that I have discussed a little bit in detail, that both of them are described, historical narrative, either reformist, saint, or Ambedkar as constitutionalist, pragmatist, and so on. It never attribute that conceptual rupture that they have made it into history, and the benefits of that we all actually, in certain sense, actually irrespective of which community that they are coming from, but we all actually, in certain sense, actually today hold on to some of the values that has produced, that has kind of outlived or the afterlife of their acts, that what actually we now think as now or conceptualize as pointers to challenge the oppressive world of the contemporary. So this is why the historical is important to me. Becoming historical for me is contemporary.
Shall we come in, Michelle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Amazing. I find myself drawn to the devices, the rock drawn from the river, the drinking of water, the mirror, and I thought I'd share a few anecdotes that it sparked for me along the way. So, one thing that has been striking to me in thinking about the triennial, specifically this one, spatially, at least partially hosted in the Yokohama Museum, is that this building is designed in such a way that its collection is held aloft as a way to keep it out of the way of encroaching floodwater. So this kind of entombing doesn't happen in the kind of foxhole basement. And then if we stake triennial as a kind of paradigmatic weather system, what does this do to disturb the kind of lock and stow operation of the collection? If in fact this thing is designed to float. So, I'm picturing a kind of like swelling undertow that pulls a collection from its bolts and hinges, so that this museum is kind of floating and drifting. And this kind of, for me, is a kind of invitational mode for unruly guests, earthquakes as well, tsunamis, typhoons. Because during the installation of the exhibitionary period, there were a few days of earthquake proofing, which is the first time I'd encountered such thing. And there's kind of structural affordance making around the kind of holding or mechanical support around artistic propositions with the kind of tensile string that is designed into the logic of the architecture itself. And elsewhere, one thinks of the trash vortex, the floating mass, the size of Texas in the North Pacific, largely polythenes and plastics, which is of course also the largest architectural formation of the 21st century. Elsewhere still, the Three Gorges Dam that holds 42 billion tons of water, that moves water at such scale that it slows the rotation of the Earth, right? Increasing the day on Earth by, I think, 0.06 microseconds or something like that. And then, I'm sipping some whiskey now, and I recall the common refrain among whiskey enthusiasts that you add a few drops of water to open the whiskey. And then from openings, I think to this idea of meeting the water. Going back to Santhosh, what you described, this kind of idea of the revolutionary act as about becoming imperceptible. And it occurred to me that these devices that you use, the rock drawn from the river, the drinking of the water, somehow they occasion meetings with water. And I don't mean in the sort of nostalgic or diasporic kind of water drunk sense, but there's some, for me, what's interesting is a kind of on the one hand, a kind of thirst, which of course also draws its own water, mouth watering, as in. And then also this kind of meeting of a disturbance in some kind of disturbance of coherence, coherence of coherence of self, coherence of the meeting. There's the formulation of the third climber in mountaineering, in which the mountaineers report the inexplicable appearance of a kind of phantom apparition, vividly real, that becomes some kind of support, guide, companion. And in fact, Monica has written this as a kind of opening of bicameral consciousness and disruption to nervous system. So I'm trying to somehow relate this to the kind of meeting of the water body, and this idea of thirst. And you know, through the past 2 days, there have been two concepts: the diorama as the through that which is seen, and then the justice that is not only to be done but to be seen to be done. I'm trying to think about these two formulations also as this kind of meeting of some sort outside of this kind of optic verification.
I want to think along the lines of Santhosh's claim of, you know, being historical from the contemporary. I mean, we've had many conversations, Lee, Kabelo, and I, of, you know, when we were thinking about this Episōdo, that, you know, we lean in unexpected ways towards the historical. And sometimes that is an alarming or an unsettling sort of position. Sometimes. I mean, I also myself have this practice in Lee, and I've over so many years, over our many conversations, have had so many banters around the histories and the stories of the cities that we live in, and whether a claim of the, like, what is the point of the claim to be historical when, you know, a place either, you know, is claimed to be disappearing or is built out of the desert from nothing anyway. But I do think there is I agree with you in what you said, that, you know, there is value and it is important to be historical precisely for the contemporary. I recall this other conversation with Lee about this film called 10 Years, right, Lee? Which, you know, a few years ago was a huge thing in Hong Kong, where there are sort of a few sort of shorter films in which filmmakers speculate about what this place would be 10 years from now. And one
like
of the
anthology, you know?
Anthology.
Like, yeah.
I actually haven't seen it, but I'm resisting to see it still. I don't want to see it. I mean, I don't want to know. But from what you have told me is that one of the films is about the archive. Like who in a city as cosmopolitan or quote unquote sort of global and in the now as the one that I am in now speculates about its future by creating the imagination of an archive.
Right.
But I think that precisely is the reason, or sort of why this claim of being historical for the contemporary is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, on this thirst thing also, and Michelle, I forget how you put it just now, but, you know, I live in a place that's the second largest water desalinator on the planet. And the neighbor next door is the world's first. So within the region, I mean, we're the planetary experts on removing salt from water. And what's interesting to me is this kind of like idea of the of thirst, and this kind of let's say if we think desalination as a kind of metering the pH, the salinity, the alkalinity and acidity of the water. So, I'm also curious to think about, there's this idea of like soft water, hard water.
Right, yeah.
And I'm just picking up from the Q&A also, a few reflections. These are coming from anonymous attendees. One says, I've come across a story of a community that specializes in a, quote, sacred brass/bronze mirror. Does this instance of the use of the mirror relate to this story? And what kind of a mirror was it? And is that important? And a follow-up, same anonymous attendee, or maybe recast the question as what kind of mirror was it? And have you, what was it made of? Is it relevant? And have you come across a story of a sacred bronze mirror?
There is nothing sacred about it. That's what I was going to finish the story itself. I was trying to say that it is like something that bought from a shop. You send somebody, you have to wait for a day to get the mirror, because this is just a mirror that we actually like every day see our face or whatever. It's almost like a industrially produced mirror. Something, I think, sacrosanct about it.
We have
Shall I move to?
Additionally some comments.
Okay, please.
Pick up the ready-made and another history of the ready-made. I mean, I don't know if this is entirely this is a tangent, but oftentimes it seems to me that I find myself contending with this kind of ready-made foundness and its relation to found object, as it were, and relation to the finder. That the object is found, as opposed to the object is, or the object becomes. So I'm curious about that and how you're casting that historically, but also I think particularly this thing of the political act, of that all political acts are about becoming imperceptible, and what that does in relation to the mirror.
You want me to answer it now, or you want me to read the rest of it? I can actually answer at least the first part, not the imperceptible part, because it's going to come to my other memos as well. So I will just, it is not that, no, we are not. This is what I was trying to say in terms of the facile relativism of, I was not trying to do that. I was saying, is that it's not that the object in itself is that interests me, either in the Duchambian gesture or the Guru jet. The gesture of that, the way that quite intuitively they identify an object that can and produce certain reflection, something that is like considered as, for instance, in the Duchambian case, it is something that it's in the tail end of actually, human existence. To something that is like, you look yourself to something where in which you can actually kind of see where you are. I see that I see that both comes from some kind of an intuitive way of actually responding to a situation, a context, and but what interests me is both has. It's not like this object itself has some kind of power in the context. The power also comes from the consecratory power. My interest is that the guru can actually do that among a warring community, or Dusham can do that, but art historians who write about these things, they also have consecratory power to write about it. That's what they make them into history and make. So I'm more interested in the kind of a network of this consecratory power. What it identifies as radical, revolutionary. What it finds in each moment. How their signature has done in his signature or somebody else's signature, and so on. I'm saying that the certain narrative tyranny, certain interpreted tyranny that overrule all possibilities, all other possibilities that have maybe equal or more kind of significance and valid in terms of people's life and so on. Everything can be eroded. So I'm more interested in the consecratory aspect of it. This both Narayana Guru, Dusham, and the writer. How you kind of intervene into that consecratory domain itself. My attempt was that. I don't know it came through that way or not, but to me it is very, very important. It's not like merely to compare, this kind of some parallel, some similarity, and so on. Definitely, this needs to be articulated in terms of geopolitics, in the way in which whatever happened in a gallery in Europe can be the world history and so on. That's another. I was not actually kind of positioning at this point in that sense, but that itself has to be challenged. I know that people try to write performance art history, looking at woman art movement and so on. So I may ask them that why Narayana Guru, this act is not part of that history. Why only certain kind of claim about the modern can make that history possible. So this is the problem of the who can consecrate what into history. That is what my contention, not my not only contention. It's also like something that's enlivened in me actually quite a bit.
Before I know you want to roll on to the next memo, Santhosh, but I think there's a comment which may be particularly relevant to this memo. So I will just state it and you can carry it. Huh?
Please.
So from Sabi, in the preface to your presentation, you mentioned a critique of humanism through the revisiting of subaltern histories. My question is, in your view, what is to be done with humanism? I ask this because on the one hand, there is an ongoing philosophical and political preoccupation with post-humanism that often veers toward a critique of enlightenment that hinges on becoming cyborg or becoming technologically hybrid, that finally suggests a becoming an excess of the human. And sorry, 1 second, I've lost the script. And you seem to be suggesting a critique of humanism through a different trajectory that asks maybe becoming subhuman, under common. So is there something else in your critique of humanism that is offered that is not the typical post-humanism? And if so, I'm keen to hear what it is. Your views on discourse of humanism and post-humanism in the contemporary moment.
Yeah, thanks for that question, because I think I already kind of mentioned that while saying that these acts actually claim a better humanism, a universal humanism that it's also claims of the universals. So, even all the critics, from cyborg to post-humanist, because the core of the argument is that the way in which we understood, conceptualized, articulated, made it as a kind of an axis of knowledge, that is still problematic. That is where the post-human actually begins from. It's not that humanism as such is not as a value, because the humanism is not a value, is understood more in terms of the historical trajectory through which that the idea of the human itself has actually kind of developed. Ideas, humanism itself become so normalized, so invisibilized in that sense. So I think that like every if you take any either from history or from contemporary political struggles, that every struggle in a certain sense to challenge what is given as the human, but it is not to challenge that it's always about a certain sense that to say that it's not that the humanism that we are proposing is better than your humanism kind of an argument, but it is not that critic is not to say that we have a the humanism in the way in which you project it. We have a the humanism where in which the animality of the human, there is a possibility of becoming and so on. There is I think that the historical figures always actually try to claim that they have a better sense, better inclusive sense, intensive sense of humanism than the humanism that is either produced by the traditional intelligentsia or what is produced as modern by the traditional intelligentsia in different contexts. So I think the struggle is like much more complicated than actually merely that the way in which we understand the human and the post-human, to my mind. Let me kind of give an example to illustrate what I tried to say. In Kanja Ailayas, I am not a Hindu. There is this, I don't remember exactly the name of the deity. It's a deity that is kind of well worshipped in Andhra, the Telugu region. So it's a woman goddess. So he keeps on saying that in I think Pachamma, I think her name is Pachamma. Pachamma's temple, anybody can go. Pachamma can understand any language. English she understand, Hindi she understand, any language, respective Spanish, she receive anything as an offering, the meat to the flower to anything. He keeps on describing, what all, she can speak in different language, she can accept any offerings, she can keep on saying that our goddesses themselves are much more universal, much more, what you understand humanism is so limited, so insular, our own, humanist manifestation of the goddess themselves, are themselves capacitated, in such a way that, it can receive everything and anything. So this is the way in which, historically, people, communities, challenged that very insular form of humanism. So in that sense, that's post-humanistic in a certain sense, to my mind, even though it's a practice that happens in the religious domain. It is already post-humanistic.
So with that, shall we go on?
Yep.
Yeah.
The second memo is minor, minority, minoritarian. So this memo is going to be, I'm going to read it out. So there is not going to be much examples like my first memo. This is going to be kind of a conceptual proposition that I want to make, and I am ready to have a conversation after that, after two memos, I think, together. Yeah? The notion of minority and its relationship with various apparatuses of society is a complex one. As is widely in agreement now, the opposition between minority and majority is not simply quantitative. Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari has noted, the problem lies not in the distinction between the minor and the major language. Rather, I quote, it is one of becoming. It is a question not of re-territorializing oneself on a dialect or a patwa, but of deterritorializing the major language, close quote. They argued that one needs to distinguish between the homogeneous and constant system of the majoritarian and the subsystem of the minoritarian in order to use the latter as a potential, creative, and created becoming. In that sense, the aim is never to acquire a majority, not even or not to install a new constant. Minoritarian continuous variation, in fact, is an amplitude that continually oversteps the representative threshold of the majoritarian standards by excess or default. This is something that maybe the answer that I was trying to give to Sabi might come from this. Let me clarify certain things here. First, we should not equate or confuse the minoritization of language or minorization of major language. It's not a mere aesthetical experimentation. You know, often that is what we witness in our encounter. Such an understanding is very often a result of not taking into account the fact that language is charged with power relations. Language and the object of language are understood to carry much more than the function of communication. In fact, language constitutes the primary order of things. It classifies. If you remember, Guru is writing and say that the mistake is okay. Mistake still have meaning. In fact, language constitutes the primary order of things. It classifies, organizes, explains, and thereby stabilizes the world. In that sense, language is evoked here as more than a mere collection of ideological signifiers. It is a mode of action. Various mechanisms of culture are enforced through regular patterns of practice, collective assemblages of enunciation. That's what Deleuze says, or regimes of signs. Definitely, non-discursive forces which shape our material world are in constant interaction with these regimes of signs. They also constantly interact with various non-discursive practices that form what Deleuze and Guattari call the machinic assemblages. In this context, it may be useful for us to revisit Deleuze's own differentiation between the actual and the virtual. Deleuze states that, I quote, the virtual is opposed not to the real, but to the actual. The virtual is fully real insofar as it is virtual. Virtual is fully real insofar as it is virtual. Close quote. He acknowledges that the virtual actualizes itself, but it is not actual. Deleuze also often cautions against a mistake that can be made in thinking about the virtual. The distinction between the virtual and the actual is not the same as the distinction between the possible and the real. Todd May, one of the Deleuzian scholars, captures this substantive difference elegantly. According to May, we can register at least two crucial differences. First, the possible does not exist, while the virtual does. It is real. The possible is what might become or might have become real, but as yet has not. The virtual is already real. It does not need to have anything added to it in order to become real. The virtual does not need to have anything added to it to how to become real. The second difference is that the possible is a mirror of the real, while the virtual does not mirror the actual. The possible is structured like the real, missing only its characteristics of really existing. Minorization then is definitely an intervention of the minoritization then is definitely an intervention of the minority in the major language, but Deleuze refuses to fix an ontological limit to the category minor without renouncing the ontological character of minority existence. This is the reason that minorization is imagined as an act or a process of becoming where the ontological or sensorial, whichever way you want to add it, or ontological deprivations ascribed to the condition of being minor are in fact converted into sources of strength and potentialities. Let me read that again. This is very crucial. This is the reason that minorization is imagined as an act or a process of becoming where the ontological deprivations ascribed to the condition of being minor are in fact converted into sources of strength and potentialities. But becoming minor as a possibility, a political potential is not limited to a given minority identity as such. The given minorities also need to invent the plurality of minority becomings, but unlike the majority, because of the very virtue and curse of historical ontology, the minor's entry itself, in principle, stutters the major language. Okay, this is what the historical history comes into being. At the same time, the possibility of becoming minor of the major language is not limited to this historical ontology. Keeping in mind the fact that when the cultural practitioners with minoritarian positioning efficaciously experiment with the language, they do not simply manipulate signifiers. They experiment on the real. They activate lines of continuous variation immanent within language. And in doing so, they engage the same forces of creative deformation that various minorities utilize in fashioning their own speech within dominant language. Certainly, a minor usage of language is intricately connected with the socio-political conditions and context within which it has been activated. But at the same time, it engages with the non-linguistic, quote-unquote, outside, constructed mostly by differential speeds and affective intensities. This is evident in Deleuze's formulation regarding becoming as not exclusively linguistic, since it also an engagement with the virtual. In his conversation with Claire Parnett, Deleuze observes that the ultimate aim of language use, in particular of writing, is, I quote, becoming imperceptible, where the processes and forms of becoming are fundamentally aimed at attaining such imperceptibility. The struggle of the minor can be understood through this conception of imperceptibility, since what all identities ultimately seek is an end to their life as socio-linguistic signifier, thereby asserting their right not to be victims of the semiotic tyranny of socio-political orders. The demand for visibility in the discursive field by the minor or minor identities are ultimately destined towards a political struggle for imperceptibility. And becoming imperceptible is a process of elimination whereby one divests oneself of all coded identity. The camouflaged fish, according to Deleuze and Guattari, far from illustrating mimeticism in nature, is an exemplary practitioner of becoming imperceptible. I quote, "The fish is crisscrossed by abstract lines that resembles nothing, that do not even follow its organic divisions, but thus disorganized, disarticulated, it whirls with the lines of a rock, sand, and plants, becoming imperceptible." Memo 3, contagion, contamination. This memo will explore contagion as capacity rather than incapacity. My interest is to engage with the social effects of contagion. My interest is to engage with the social effects of contagion. Drawing and redrawing of individual and communal boundaries, the creation of communities and geographies marked as pure and impure. So let me kind of start with the idea of India, that people who are from India very familiar, or people are actually part of any anthropological ethnographic debates. The idea of the endogamy. As we all knew, the endogamy is one of the core features of caste. For instance, in 2011, the rate of intercaste marriage in India was as low as 5.8%. More than 2 centuries after the Industrial Revolution, 19 out of 20 marriages in India are still conducted as per the dictates of the ancient caste system. Not only does caste resist changes by time, it also manages to transcend the rural-urban divide. This is something that I was also quite surprised. According to Ray Roy Choudhury and Sahai, urban households do not have a higher probability of intercaste marriage than the rural households. Ironically, metropolitan cities have the lowest rate amongst the urban centers. Clearly, the massive changes associated with urbanity in other parts of the globe are unable to shake India's ancient citadel of caste. This is the reason Ambedkar had stated in his very, very important work called Castes of India, Their Mechanism, Genesis and Development, that I quote, the critical evaluation of the various characteristics of caste leave no doubt that prohibition, or rather absence of intermarriages, endogamy, to be concise, is the only one that can be called the essence of caste when rightly understood. So this is one thing that you have to keep in mind while dealing with a contingent. Next one. Let us look at the religious and philosophical conceptions regarding the body to expand this idea of the contingent. In the Brahminical worldview, that is the dominant worldview of the Hindu religious order, the body is graded according to the purity it encompasses or inherit by birth. The stratification of caste group in endless chain of grades of purity and impurity, or purity and pollution, is an outcome of this philosophical outlook and practice. Let me kind of take something from another interesting contemporary philosopher called Sundar Sarukai. It's not his own kind of reading, but he kind of summarized it nicely for us to understand it. He said that the Buddhist notion, for instance, the Buddhist notion about body is antithetical to the Brahminical notion of purity. The Buddhists, in fact, completely rejected the Brahminical outlook about the body, where all body is understood as impure. Okay, there's no body in the world is pure. The body is fundamentally impure. I'm evoking this also that the Ambedkar's own later decision to convert into Buddhism and or define a form of Buddhism that he calls Neo-Buddhism and so on. So that there is a philosophical reason behind that move, wherein which the body itself is understood as fundamentally impure. There's a pure body and impure body. So we have to keep in mind these two instances. One is endogamy, where in which certain kind of a purity is protected. Second is the Hindu conception of the body. Some bodies are inherently pure, biologically pure. It keep on changing. That there is it's ironic that there are a lot of debates about genetics, about Aryan, Dravidian. This all happens. But if you read all this debate out of their pretension of scientificity, the argument is about some kind of purity. So there is some inherent purity of certain group of people. Certain people are by birth impure. That impurity can be translated into multiple socio-linguistic kind of signifiers. So I don't want to stay with that for very long, but I just want you people to keep signpost that these 2-3 ideas in your mind. Unlike say something like an infection, contagion is all about contact. Infection can happen without contact because it's a direct contact. So, the infection is actually like more imagined as a kind of mediated or indirected contact. Like infection may not need contact. But in this capacity to spread by contact, contagion invites very uneasy consideration of connections between things. Unlike infection is that there is no surface to the infection. Because in contagion, people, animal, organic objects, inanimate objects, everything as we knew the world, has to be connected. So in that sense, contagion is the Kantian real, in a certain sense. It is that non-describable, but the real in its pure sense. It is almost like an imperative. It is not the if you recollect the Kantian division, it is very clear that the thing in itself or things in themselves, the contagion is almost at the heart of the things in itself, because it is that has to do with the surface. It is that has to imagine about a contact. So contagion is, in that sense, is that something that beyond the legal medical debate, that something can really provide us some insight into the real, Lacanians, the real in that concrete sense. Let us move forward. Yeah, the social management of contagion. That's something that really we are kind of discussing for quite some time. It involves differentiation and identification, which are often conceived spatially. It's very easy to kind of recognize, understand in our time. It's like quarantine, isolation, containment, and so on. So that's the only way in which contagion is understood. But contagion also kind of it has a very intense potential of the real. I don't want to get into that. It's not. I don't want to get into, but I don't have time to get into that debate about the germs and the viruses and so on. But I'm just signposting this point that contagion as something that so crucial to understand the real. Okay, I'm just going to read out something. I think I have overshot this session a little bit, so I will just read out something that I have written quite some time back in 2016. It's from the instances are from the political history of India. I'm referring here about a mode of protest undertaken in 2016 by Dalits Dalits, for people who are unfamiliar with the term, let me say that Dalits generally have kind of a contradictory or a double meaning or a multiple meaning in that sense. In the bureaucratic governmental kind of vocabulary, it is understood as a collection of untouchable castes, or caste is outside the margins of Hindu Varna system. But it's more than that. It's actually, in fact, not necessarily all the untouchable castes. It's like so their definition, which is like the lowermost bottom of the caste. But we hardly or no more use that governmental category. The Dalit is understood more in terms of an emancipatory category as a political ferment or a political formation. So the way in which I'm using Dalit is not a kind of categorization that is neither fully agreed with the governmental mechanism. They say that scheduled caste and scheduled tribe and so on. They won't even use it, but whenever they use it, it is not. It's almost bereft of any political acumen. So the way I am using, the reason I am just kind of signposting this thing, because the way I am using the word Dalit is more as a political ferment or a formation. So there is some Dalit youth, Dalit community people who protest something that happened in Saurashtra region of Gujarat. In 2016, some of the cow protectionists, the people who really think that the life of cow is the most sacred life, even more sacred than any other beings in the world, including human. So they accused and assaulted a few of lower caste men of killing cows in the village of Mota Samadhiala, near the city of Una in Saurashtra region of the state of Gujarat in India. So basically what happened, these people were people who take out the skin of the dead animal for the purpose of making leather and so on. So this is their kind of enforced kind of an occupation. So this is a kind of traditional, what you can traditional occupation. So they were actually kind of removing skin of a dead cow, and some group of upper caste men actually felt that they killed a cow and removing the skin or whatever. So they are like badly beaten up and paraded, like so almost like a medieval, quote unquote, medieval punitive system. But what happened is that this kind of and people recorded it. The important thing is the technology become very important thing, because the same people who did these atrocities on the men also recorded and actually practiced as a kind of a pride thing. Also, people who are actually onlookers also kind of record it and put it into social media and so on. That led to a massive protest by the Dalit groups across Gujarat, across India. That became a kind of a defining moment for, again talking about the question of caste. To my interest, what was the most important thing is that one of the protests that had happened in Una, the city itself, was that the Dalit men and the Dalit community, the members of the Dalit community, carried all the carcasses of the dead cow, dead animals, into whichever vehicle that is available to them, tractors to small vehicles. They carried it. They are like rotten animal carcasses and dumped it into the municipal compound itself. And saying that from now onwards, we are not going to remove the carcass of any dead animal. We are refusing to be part of that traditional job that is ascribed to us. So I feel that that act of refusing to work, refusing to continue work, as well as the act of actually kind of bringing the carcasses of the dead animal, the rotten animal, to the citadels of power and dumping them there is a marker of a new sensorial politics. It is also a marker. It's also a way in which the most deprived, most sensorially, most economically, most socially deprived community find articulation in terms of challenging what exactly constitute work in their context. What exactly is the work? Is the work actually like going underneath the sewages without any protective gear and clearing the sewages for the privileged, the upper caste? Or is work to go and desensitize, like almost kill your senses. If you want to deal with the rotten carcasses, you have to absolutely kill your senses because you have no other ways of handling it. Nothing is provided by either the municipal corporation or the government. So they refuse to work. My argument is that their refuse to work actually poses a greater challenge, a greater challenge in the sense a greater conceptual rupture to the way in which we understand what constitutes work and the labor. Both in terms of the liberal discourses as well as in terms of the radical left discourses, the work is actually almost taken for granted because work in itself can have demeaning things, but here there is no the peculiarity of the situation that I am describing is that the work itself is not like you engage with it and a problem. The problem is that your engagement is ascribed to the work. So that denial for me, is very crucial. So it moves away from some kind of universal notion about fundamental right to work to fundamental right not to work. I think it can have resonances not only in terms of this context, because many people have theorized about the work itself become what we asked as work itself become like the anti thesis of it. So I'm just going to end that third memo by saying that following Deleuze, one may say that politics is the ability to affect and to be affected, to form assemblages, that is to form emergent unities that nonetheless respect the heterogeneity of their components.
Santhosh, first in relation to overshooting, please continue shooting. And two questions, Kabelo, if I may, before you come in. One from the Zoom Q&A box. Anonymous attendee says, central to the Ambedkarite movement today is the consecration of sculptures following an aesthetics of permanence as an interruptive act in the narrative of history as delineated by Brahmanical assertion. Any comments on this? And then one more question of mine, but maybe this first. Hello, Santhosh. Have we lost Santhosh? Santhosh has become imperceptible. Santhosh, are you back? We can't hear you. It appears you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm here only.
Yeah. Did you hear the question?
No, please repeat it.
Okay. Central to the Ambedkarite movement today is the consecration of sculptures following an aesthetics of permanence as an interruptive act, in the narrative of history as delineated by Brahminical assertion. Any comments on this?
Not really. I don't know the context.
Then one question from me.
No, if that is like something about Mayavadi statues and so on, I can answer, but I don't know what is the context. Consecration of idols, I don't know. Yeah. Sorry.
To the anonymous attendee who asked the question, if you can,
and they can add the question.
Some contextual ground. Yeah.
Yeah.
One question for me, maybe more of a point of clarity. You talked about the relation between the virtual and the real and actual. So, but where is the actual, or when is the actual, or where is the actual in relation to this idea of contact as imagined by contagion?
The actual contact can be like, that you wear mask, these are things can be like, can happen. Like now I don't think anybody, even if you disagree, you have a discursive realm to argue for that, because there are actual threats and so on. Now, virtually is that something that is equally, actual. For instance, I'll tell again from the Indian context that this is the only contagion that is ascribed to people who are crossing borders, traveling. People. These are things really comes from elsewhere, and people who are affluent become the carriers of the contagion. So there is a certain actuality to it, because that is the way it has come. But actually what happens is that, how eventually those debates actually kind of completely, no, it's not to say that, there's nothing, I'm not trying to essentialize it to say that, there is something that you have to punish people for. I'm not saying that. The initial kind of all communication mechanisms that are working to sabotage this misplacement or displacement of a common narrative. But what happens is that, but actually the actual is kind of returned back to a virtual, in the sense that again the contagion become the problem of the housemaid. A person cut your hair. They're actual, definitely. But the the contagion actually operates not necessarily them in terms of actual. You know, there is a in every you know, the most solid, most articulated, most discursive social you know, outside, you know, that claim some kind of you know, coherence, some kind of you know, articulability, some kind of rational, and so on. It actually have a you know, equally or more dominating virtual presence. This is one way of, this is only one way of looking, because I'm just actually using as an example. Examples sometimes can be misleading, you know, but this is not the way that Deleuze actually talked about virtual and actual. I'm just answering your question. But this is also the way in which Deleuze looked into the question of because they are actually both actual. They are not you know, replaceable. One is actual, one is you know. So that is the way that I use that in the context of contagion. Yeah.
The anonymous attendee who had the question on Ambedkar said that yes, it's Mayawati. So I hope that clarifies for you, Santhosh.
You know, I think, you know, like there is a brilliant essay by Kajri Jain. You know, I kind of suggest all of you to read that essay about the Mayavadi monument. The handbag that was exploded is the title of the essay. That you know, I think it also kind of give you again, you know, what exactly Deleuze meant by the actual and the virtual and the possible in a particular way, a historically concretized way, because why that monument came to being, why that particular material, why the monumentality, why references, and so on. And I can actually have a full lecture on that. So I suggest that you know, the other typical answer would be that, you know, look at all over India that, you know, there are, I don't know how many number. I don't think there is a directory of how many Nehru Memorial, how many Gandhi Memorial, you know, Patel actually like 30,000 crores. I'm saying it's like, you know, this obsession with, you know, this double bind. I'm going to come to a double bind a little later, but I'm just saying that this double bind, you know, if a Dalit politician, you know, because they come from, you know, they're supposed to carry that weight and the burden of, you know, their poverty, you know, so the Dalit literature become like a hot potato to many, because, you know, it talks about some kind of poverty or something like that. You know, that is not the point. You know, the point is that, you know, cultural assertion, the Mayavadi's, that monument, it's a cultural assertion, you know, wherein which actually she kind of positions Ambedkar exactly like the Lincoln Monument. Okay, this is the first time in the history of northern India that the Narana Guru that I have kind of cited in the beginning to Ayankali, to many people, it become part of a national monument. You know, so and it's a very concrete, huge monument, a granite monument, and so on. What I'm going to say is that, you know, this, like, you know, that money should have been spent for eradicating poverty. This is the argument generally makes. You know, if, you know, that's where that, you know, Mayavadi only ruled for some, you know, 10 years in a state. If that's the case, the money got spent in eradication of poverty, eradication of all these things, and we don't have to speak about this. We are talking about something that, you know, a symbolic absence. Yeah.
I think for me, I don't have questions as such, but rather just points. And the first one is related to, I guess, language. And there's a kind of like street level talk I guess in any city, but in South Africa, there's a phrase which says "angazi, but I'm sure," and it translates to "I don't know, but I'm sure." And this is often a phrase that's said before one answers. So it's followed by a sort of claim, and so I thought of this while you were speaking.
Absolutely.
Maybe this point is leading more towards the idea of contagion, and I've said this many times. During the Roads Must Fall, Mateke, who started the movement. I mean, I think one thing that is often not mentioned when Roads Must Fall is invoked, or even Fees Must Fall, is that protests around different universities in South Africa around fees and such happen. But I guess the politics of privilege also played their part in UCT and VERTS being more visible internationally. But in any case, Mateke takes, so the townships, and some of them in the informal settlement, the toilet system is still a bucket system. So he carried a bucket full of shit and threw this shit on the Rhodes statue. And in doing this, he told the security guard that he had permission because he was a performance artist, and therefore he could transgress. I guess he had the right to transgress.
Interesting.
And for me, so that, I mean, here we are. We are talking about your. I think in earlier conversation you said the politics of stench, and we're also talking about fecal matter, but also like I guess again privilege and class comes in, even when it's in relation to fecal matter. And my other point, which was more about toxicity and the proximity to it, is in relation to the Saharan desert storms. So said that the Saharan desert, or in Chad particularly, there was a lake which dried up and fossilized, and so these fossils, or the dust on the desert, gets picked up, and of course the great part is that the cloud falls on the Amazon forest, nourishing it, and I guess ecologists are happy for that. Even on the one hand, there is of course a deforestation of the same forest.
Right.
And there is, of course, the part where the dust storms poke holes into typhoon clouds, sometimes making sure that there are no typhoons, which is also, I imagine, humans are happy about that one. There is, of course, this the dust storms also in the Gulf of Mexico. When they reach the beach, they create a toxic algae. So here, they are not as welcome as in all the other ways that they've managed to do other things. So for me, there's also a particular, I'm not quite sure how to articulate this, but there's like a level of the proximity, so those were my points of on your memos.
Thanks for that. It's an important thing because I don't want to stay with it for very long, but I just want to say that, maybe I will speak about it later in the other section, other memos as well. But see, I completely agree with you that the as per contagion is like it's a constant threat to the working class per se, or subaltern class per se. It is the mining, or it is in other forms of activities in the most industrialized ways. But in our context, that what only point I'm trying to make is that in our context, that it does produce some kind of organicity to certain group of people who it's as if that because there is no data to even mining industry, or other than some figures still surfaces in terms of this many people got killed or this many people, but people who are actually living and people kind of lived not a natural course of death, they're dead like that, the lengths that I have seen, or a universe that the macro to the micro, we have no way of actually knowing that. We only have our antennas to evoked by rage or sorrow. Everything remains within a number of people that so it's like our sensorial actually only respond to accidents, as if everything else is very, very normal. My problem is that with that, that the reason I was talking about the work, etc., is also like what constitutes the normal, normal in terms of work, So this is something that not necessarily about these people who are actually collecting carcasses or or cleaning the street. This can be expanded to multiple ways, But there is a irrespective of the fact that there are very good scholastic interventions into this domain in terms of unearthing. But there is I always simultaneously feel that lacuna in their approach, where it become like more in terms of producing some kind of an extensive data to influence the policy. I think the politics won't happen like that. It may happen in some sense. Politics won't happen in that sense, and politics actually happens in not in that that extensification of it. Politics actually happens, and that's why actually I like that, from the lengths to the universe, politics happens like that. That's where actually, there is this, I wrote a piece long back, just kind of reflecting on a suicide letter by a Dalit PhD student called Rodrigue Karemera. His aspiration to be, a stardust. It comes from that. But what we get with all good intention, I it's not that I really value it, but what is not there is a big problem. That is what, to my mind, the expansive politics cannot capture. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm clear about it, but this is what I was trying to kind of articulate. Maybe another closed session may make it a little more clear, but this is what I was trying to say.
If I can ask for another point of clarity quickly, so
sure.
So scientific is. So you're not saying you're saying scientific is not some kind of a proof or laundering kind of path for sanitation practice, but that scientific is the logic.
So that the answer to the question is that let us provide more protective gears to this people. It's a welcoming act, but but it actually only addresses the real, not the virtual. That's what I'm trying to say. The virtual is the more crucial real, because there is a 100% reservation for the the lowest caste groups into this, but we won't see it as a reservation or affirmative policy, because this is like their traditional job, so making it that scientific actually may not actually really solve the problem, because the problem is to produce some kind of dignified labor, any labor. To produce dignified labor is a different task. It's without that dignified labor, we cannot really expect that some kind of a working class labor consciousness emerging. But simply by saying that these people who are not unable to get that consciousness, they are like some if I use some kind of Marxian terminology that I feel like almost like some curse word, it's like lumber total trade, whatever. They have no consciousness of themselves, their own, so that kind of a consciousness, that kind of scientificity, that it is not adequate enough to understand the affective dimension of labor that constitute the laboring body. That's what really my only not only it's a serious contention that I make, not only contention.
And where's your figuration of minoritization in relation to the moral discourse that is produced and performed by the overriding apparatus? Like how to get out of that kind of circular without like staging a rescue,
See, it happened. I don't think there is a formulaic answer to that. I take again from two examples from Kerala. That is one from say again the Guru, because I don't know how to give him a biographical note. He kind of asked his own community that this community is one of the major occupation or labor was toddy tappers, basically. Like they have how to say toddy tappers, I don't know. They are kind of they make some kind of inebriated what the liquor kind of a thing out of coconut tree. So he says that no, you should stop. You should not do that, because this is what the sensorial politics means. Because you smells like that, you behave like that. You should not do that, because it's a very moralistic kind of a thing. They're saying that your job, certain sense actually kind of defining you, but that cannot be taken out of context. The emancipatory potential of actually like getting into that is that you have to move beyond. You should not actually kind of tie yourself to the ascribed. You have to invent new forms of existence. What I'm going to say is that this can be very what you can say, programmatic kind of way. Another one is like, all of them are saying that we would like to see, like both Guru and another reformer, Iyengali and etc., saying that we would like to see that, in another, in my lifetime at least, we have to have, at least 10 people who are actually educated in the modern education. So this is something very, very, very interesting. So we are talking about colonial education with all limitations. But this is a moment they are actually looking at that colonial education as a possibility of transgression. So these are like historically very contingent situations. And if you take that thing out of that and say that they were puritanical, they are saying that you should not actually like produce liquor, produce, you should not. It is not that. But there is also equal amount of literature to substantiate that the amount of knowledge that goes into each of their labor. It can be agricultural labor, it can be craft. There's enough amount of literature for that. You won't look into that. So you abandon that a vast array of knowledge that produces a concrete evidence of knowledge production. Then you take this moment saying that you should leave. So this leaving, like here I am saying that we are not going to continue. And Somu says it very nicely that in his book that I decide not to continue as a Hindu. I born as a Hindu, but I won't die as a Hindu. The decision. The decisions has to be understood very differently than the kind of decision that you make. I will take this job or that job. That's not a liberal capitalist logic where you choose, in a shop what job that you want to do. This is a absolutely different decision. Decision is actually a marker of history in that sense.
Yeah. I think we can go on to the next memo. Thank you.
Do you want, or we can actually stop it with 3 memos also?
No, go on. I'm curious to have more conversations on the other memos. So, yeah.
The 4th memo is called aporias. Also ambivalences. Yeah. One of the broadest way to describe philosophy as generally practiced is that it seeks to produce some resolution of aporias. And aporias are, as you know, that they are more like intractable contradictions that inevitably emerge from our understanding of the world. For instance, one of the most common aporias is that we seem to have knowledge, but also have reason to believe we can be not certain about anything, nothing. Yeah, like we have all knowledge about health, but we can die. Right. So it is not that we have knowledge, but it won't produce any certainty. So, it's like that. That's aporia. That's like we don't know how to resolve it. You can have all the equipments, all everything possible. We can do everything possible in terms of being healthy and so on. But so that's an aporia. Jacques Derrida, for instance, is a philosopher par excellence of aporia, to my mind. His biographer, it's a recent book came out. It's quite a fascinating book. Is Peter Salmon. He wrote this biography. Argued that for Derrida, I quote, the goal was to keep an aporia in suspension. And there is also actually told, like very, what you can say, very prophetically told that, in quote, ordinary language is probably right. Because ordinary language never pretends to have the precision of purity of philosophical speech. Philosophy's attempted resolution of aporias are attempts to tidy up language. Derrida, in contrast, wants to remind us that language is even less precise, even more equivocal than common sense presumes. Language is slippery since each iteration, newly recombined by each speaker, brings with it the possibility of mutation of meaning, even from the meaning the speaker intended to convey. Let us examine the question of aporia in the context. There's a lot of debate about post-national and so on. Let us kind of. It's actually like what I'm going to read it out now is like a WhatsApp conversation that I had with Jivesh Bagchi for like almost 4 or 5 months back. Just randomly we were discussing about post-national. So I just kind of taken out something. I kind of not in a conversational mode. I just took out something that I have written at that point in time. So I thought this is something that may illustrate the aporia quite closely in our context. I'm going to kind of read out the kind of conversation that I had. So I wrote, most of the Dalit and subaltern intellectual traditions' argument of nation impossible comes from the acute understanding of its morphology and structure. At the same time, there is an ambivalence in some of their positions regarding the post-national. They often see the post-national as a ploy to save the nation form from the challenges to it posed by the minoritarian discourses or movements. On the one hand, they see the possibilities of the emergence of the new universal through the global. On the other, since the hegemonic class/castes still defines the contours of the new global, they worry that certain authenticity of their historical/community experience will dissipate from the discourse itself. There is certainly an element of truth in their understanding. Discursivity around the caste is a very hard-earned historical achievement, and it has close link to the national form. My point is that most people who deal with this issue fail to conceptually engage with this tension as a productive force, which in turn leads to insular positions antithetical to what I call some kind of a minoritarian consciousness. But the problem remains in merely looking at post-national as a moment of expansion, or in other words, the post-national is largely conceptualized through a spatial imagination. My argument is that the post-national need to be conceptualized equally as a moment of intensification. We need to acknowledge that the new universals and the transformative potentials also derive from a deeper interiority. That is where faith become an important category in philosophy today. The singularity of subaltern experiences, we have to reiterate this point. The singularity of subaltern experiences does not lose itself in the post-national fraternities. Let me kind of bring this little back in terms of history. The apologists of the nation often rely on the inherent value that can be historical in some sense of the nation form. Nation is imagined as the possible last resort to stop the onslaught of global capital and the resultant neo-imperialism. But the minoritarian fear regarding the disappearance of nation form does not frame from any faith in the nation form. It is to do with the intense oppression of the form itself and their long-drawn political struggle to develop a discursivity against infrastructures of internal colonization within the nation form. The caste minorities, for instance, fear that the emergence of the debate of the irrelevance of the nation may be a way to shift the focus from the internal colonization of the national elite / the upper caste. It is very close to the way in which feminists or Black intelligentsia responded the Barthesian / post-structuralist emphasis on the death of the author. Even though they all may conceptually agree the need to challenge the authorial sender, their historical struggle to demand to consider them as legitimate authors or knowledge producers are delegitimized by the nullification of the very concept of author itself. I think, similar to the Foucauldian author function, we need to develop some functional models to deal with this double bind. This again remained as of Derrida's 3 aporias, especially the second aporia that he calls, I quote, the ghost of the undecidable, unquote. It's in force of law. His formulations goes something like this. It's a rough abbreviation of his argument. A decision begins with the initiative to read, to interpret, and even to calculate. But to make such a decision, one must first of all experience what Derrida calls undecidability. One must experience that the case, being unique and singular, does not fit the established codes, and therefore a decision about it seems to be impossible. The undecidable for Derrida is not mere oscillation between two significations. It is the experience of what, though foreign to the calculable and the rule, is still obligated. We are obligated. This is the kind of duty to give oneself up to the impossible decision while taking account of rules of the law. As Derrida says, I quote, a decision that did not go through the ordeal of the undecidable would not be a free decision. It would only be the programmable application or unfolding of a calculable process. That is why it is important to think in terms of functional models than resolving machines. Okay, so I'm going to give two examples to finish this section. Again, I'm taking Ambedkar's simultaneous espousal of the nation form and the denial of its possibility of actualization. It's a very good example for that. He says nation important and nation impossible. And India can be only a caste republic. This is also equally evident in Frantz Fanon's conceptualization of the nation form. Fanon kind of conceptualized nation as a very important thing in his political framework. He makes a terminological distinction between nationalism and national consciousness. Nationalism can lead to parochialism, but national consciousness can court internationalism. For instance, he states, I quote, national consciousness, which is not nationalism, is the only thing that will give us an international dimension. Close quote. We find here Fanon's struggle to stay with two opposing spatial scales at once. How to retain the nation and at once transcend its parochialism. This ambivalence is the byproduct of an aporia. It seems Fanon deploys contradictory assessments of place of nation in its emancipatory potential. It is necessary against colonialism and yet need not be a source of freedom. We also need to locate this position within the historical predicament. History often gives impossible choices. For Fanon, to reject nation is to stay with colonialism. To reject colonialism is to accept the nation. Both nation and colonialism can be source of oppression. This aporia is also central to W.E.B. Du Bois' conceptualization of double consciousness or Richard Wright's conceptualization of frog's perspective. I'll say aporias are in fact a very powerful tool to understand the present because post-national is always part national. Memo 5. Sharing intensity. Following cues from Deleuze's formulations, the necessity to engage with the notion of minoritarian aesthetics and community needs to be directed towards the question of how to conceive an anti-essential community formation. Let me make a proposition here. If community is to be thought of, it must be at the level or in the interstices of what can be signified or produced as a recognizable common identity. And I suggest that the term Nancy uses for communal nature, being in common, might be useful in this context. It is useful because being in common clearly does not mean having something in particular in common. Rather, it means being exposed to the others in a relationship of sharing in which the limits of the individuals are neither stable nor destroyed. I quote, being in common means that being is nothing that would have a common property, even though we are, or even though being is not common to us, except in the mode of being shared. Close quote. This conception of community avoids the danger of individualism that liberal democracy generates, as well as the pitfalls of all forms of totalitarianisms. It avoids the first danger by refusing to countenance the idea of the individual as preconstituted before her immersion in the community. It avoids the second danger by refusing to countenance the idea of the common subsistence by which the community is identified and its communal nature articulated. The implication of this proposition is that in order to think about, for instance, Dalit as a radical community formation, one should primarily conceive it as a community without direct signification. Any common substance, that is a signifier like caste, by its essential nature is capable of producing totalitarianism, or in other words, any signification that the community holds as its defining identity can create newer hegemonic discourses and suppress differences under the pretext of obligations. The logic of caste, according to me, is a counterproduct of hegemonic discourses. The newer community formation, such as Dalit, is not merely a unification of oppressed castes against the oppressive castes. Dalit formation is not limited by or to the traditional liberal view of interaction of different pre-constituted communities. But Dalit as a new community formation and as an aesthetical paradigm or aesthetic paradigm resist this traditional liberal view, because Dalit is something other than the sum of some or the relation among castes. This is similar to individual and their relations with communities, because both individuals and communities are not pre-constituted entities. In fact, such positioning and conceptualization of community simultaneously demand a new and possible relationship of aesthetics, politics, economics, and so on. All of this has brought forth or into play a new critical ontology of positioning as such, based on what I would like to call intensive differences. Let me explain this concept by briefly drawing on Deleuze again. In Difference and Repetition, Deleuze marks a crucial distinction between extensive and intensive differences. According to him, extensive differences such as length, area, or volume are intrinsically divisible. Intensity, on the contrary, is indivisible. The indispensable property of intensity, however, is not that it is indivisible, but that it is a property that cannot be divided without involve a change in kind. This is something crucial. It's not indivisible. Any division actually produces a change in kind. I draw this distinction to propose that while the existing theorization regarding the relationship between aesthetics and politics, for example, are based on principles of extensiveness, the emergent paradigm of aesthetics and politics, or many more potentialities of relations, is based largely on the aspect of intensity, thereby radically altering the symmetry of the very order of political as such. Such paradigm demands a prophetic intensity of thought that forces language to bleed internally, exposing the instability of categories as they appear, or better yet, the idea of the category does not capture what the future of art, aesthetics, and politics holds or unfolds. The minoritarian conceptualization of aesthetics reinforces the fact that there is chaos that is internal to both the world and language, which undermines the stability of the dogmatic image of thought. In turn, producing a new form of politics which defies the logic of instrumentalism in toto. Nancy's reading of George Bataille has demonstrated that the idea of sharing indicates two opposed movements at the same time. First, it implies a division of something among participants of the sharing. In that sense, it is an act of division. Second, and significantly in opposition to this, the meaning that to share something is for the participants themselves to take part in that something which may itself remain undivided. In the first movement, that which is shared is divided among participants who themselves remain undivided. The second movement, that which is shared remains undivided, and the participants, as it were, divide themselves into it. Taken together, sharing indicates a movement in which division and accord are in an economic relation, an unstable reciprocal begetting in which neither sharer nor partaker retain their limits. It shows that even though sharing is an economic concept, it cannot be reduced to a single meaning and so resist direct signification. Perhaps such a notion of sharing is the cornerstone of the emerging architecture of minoritarian politics and as aesthetics.
Michelle, will you go first?
Sure. I was struck by what you were saying of the Dalit community at sort of formulating that is beyond the sum and relation of what is existing. I think that I want to, I'd be curious to explore that more, and not necessarily now, but I have a feeling this is a very important point to sort of explore and maybe sort of also carry out in practice. Is, I think, in the majority and minority sort of demarcation, sometimes when you articulate those things, you actually then fall back into that framework that is oppressive or is limiting. But then if one is incapable of sort of articulating or sort of drawing out those contours, there also is no possibility or potential in drawing things out of that. So I think, you know what, I think, and your work has very much been about that. You know, it is in that drawing in that you draw out. And it's a very fascinating, it's a very difficult thing to do, I think, but it's very important to insist that the what one is saying is not the sum, is also not in relation to.
And it's not like some kind of a fancy theoretical formation. This is something that like we also do it, a very political action that we do. There is there is constantly these reminders are really produced because the atrocities and the deprivations are so intense on the ground. It's very difficult to speak about transgressing. Transgression actually may be easy from another vantage point. But no, once we kind of withdraw from that transgressive potential of political act, definitely we need to stand with it, we need to identify with things and so on. But once we lose that, then actually we lose the entire thing altogether. It's not that we lose something. Let me kind of tell you this thing by the first example that I had given of Narayana Guru, that minor Shiva that he actually kind of put as consecration. Now, the community that he is coming from is Ijava community that now become one of the most dominant community, not in terms of, I'm not in terms of their oppressors or something. I'm just, they were in numerical, they were always a very influential community, but eventually because of, all kinds of institutional kind of mobilization, they become kind of a dominant community. But what actually we lost in the translation, the process is that the minor Shiva that the mirror, that Guru had made it as an idol or an anti-idol, an anti-aesthetical moment, is lost in translation. It become the desire is to become a majority. The desire to like how to dress like the upper caste, how to act like upper caste, how to eat like upper caste. The desire is completely deployed. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the community in toto. I'm talking about the people who are actually kind of largely kind of having mobility in the community, is due to various kind of later intervention, kind of incorporating them into Hindutva fold and so on. Whatever the reason, we can actually kind of talk about multiple reasons. But what happens is that minor element of what actually makes their communities relevance even today, even after all the way they actually kind of partake in the major and so on. What still make their communities relevance in as a community is that variation, that minor identity that he posed. There is something that that event is imprinted on people, cannot be washed away, how much ever you do. So that implication, that imprinting of that event, is not actually like that. It's not about that's the only parallel I was trying to make in terms of Duchamp. It's not that it's a great that moment, that event and imprint. Is that what actually like is going to define, and who is going to revisit and reinvigorate that moment is going to determine the future. So that's what I think I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
On the point of aporias, I have a story.
Yeah, thank you. Stories are good.
There is a late artist. His name is Samson Muzonga. Lives in a region of South Africa, and he was a performance artist. One that was very interesting because he would carve out these drums, and that they would have the shape of a fish, some of them. And these drums in the performance, these are burial drums. And so he would go into the drums and he would do his performances. And he had a moment where he had, say, international visibility. And so his drums were collected. And then the fascination for me particularly is that he says he had a dream. His mother passed away, and his mother was a shaman or somebody who had access to other timelines. And in the dream, she wanted the drums back.
I see.
And in, of course, the contemporary art world, and also in terms of legally, once you've sold something, it no longer belongs to you. But he wants the drums back. His mother, not he wants it, his mother wants the drums back. And he emailed absolutely everybody who had bought the drum. I think there was actually, maybe not all drums, there was a specific drum that he wanted back. And he went as far as petitioning the press, seeking legal help in order to get
the drum back.
And so I think for me, that contribution.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks for that.
I guess. Shall we move on?
Yeah, I think we are the last memo, and don't worry, it's going to be just a citation. Memo 6, ellipsis. On the notion of modernity. It is a vexed question. Is not every era modern in relation to the preceding one? It seems that at least one of the components of our modernity is the spread of the awareness we have of it. The spread of the awareness we have of it. The awareness of our awareness. The double, the second degree, is our source of strength and our torment. Edward Glissant, Cross-Cultural Politics, 1996, ellipsis.